You're crazy. You ought to be locked up. You too. 250 guys just walking down the road, just like that.
The Great Escape wasn't just a war film. It was a rebellion on celluloid. What started as a true story of Allied POWs became a movie where Steve McQueen rewrote his own scenes. Actors dug real tunnels under a German set, and one stunt went so wrong, it nearly ended with a star behind actual bars. These are 20 weird facts about The Great Escape. And for the bonus, wait until you hear about the motorcycle that wasn't supposed to exist and the bike chase that rewrote action cinema forever. Grab your baseball glove. This tunnel runs deep. Fact 1, number 1. Before the cameras ever rolled, the studio had a problem. The Great Escape was supposed to be a British story, a tale of courage and ingenuity from Allied POWs trapped in Stalag Luft 3. But Hollywood wanted American money, American stars, and American audiences. So they did what studios do best. They rewrote history. Steve McQueen's character, Hiltz the Cooler King, didn't exist in The Real Escape. Neither did James Garner's Scrounger or Charles Bronson's Tunnel King in the way they were portrayed. These were composite characters, fictional heroes stitched together from dozens of real men who risked everything. The actual escape involved mostly British, Canadian, and other Commonwealth prisoners. Americans were transferred before the real breakout even happened, but the studio didn't care about authenticity. They cared about box office. And so, The Great Escape became an American triumph wrapped in a British tragedy. It worked brilliantly as entertainment, but historians have spent decades correcting the record, because sometimes the greatest escape isn't from a prison camp, it's from the truth itself. Fact 2, number 2. Steve McQueen almost wasn't in the movie at all. He'd just come off The Magnificent Seven and was one of Hollywood's hottest rising stars. When director John Sturges offered him the role of Hiltz, McQueen read the script and hated it. His character had barely any screen time, just a supporting role in an ensemble cast packed with established British actors. He felt sidelined, diminished, turned into background noise. So, he said no. He walked away. Sturges didn't panic. He knew what McQueen really wanted. Not more lines, more cool. So, he went back and invented an entire subplot that didn't exist in the original story. The motorcycle chase, the jump, the whole iconic sequence that would define the film. He brought it to McQueen like a gift. You want to be unforgettable? Here's how. McQueen read the new pages, saw himself flying over barbed wire on a stolen bike, and his answer changed immediately. He didn't just say yes, he demanded to do his own stunts. That ego, that hunger to be the coolest guy on screen, it gave us one of cinema's most legendary moments. And it almost never happened. Fact 3, number 3. The tunnels in The Great Escape weren't just sets. They were real, dug deep beneath a backlot in Bavaria, Germany. The production team didn't use miniatures or false perspectives. They excavated actual underground passages, complete with wooden supports, air pumps, and cramped crawl spaces that the actors had to squeeze through on their stomachs. And it was hell. The tunnels were hot, claustrophobic, and constantly at risk of collapse. Dirt rained down between takes. Lights flickered. Actors got stuck. Charles Bronson, who played Danny the Tunnel King, was genuinely claustrophobic in real life. He'd served in World War II, flew dangerous missions, survived real combat, but put him underground in a tight space, and he'd freeze. The production knew this going in. They thought he could handle it. He couldn't. Between takes, Bronson would crawl out, gasping for air, sweating through his costume, visibly shaken. But every time the cameras rolled, he went back in. Take after take, scene after scene. He didn't complain. He just pushed through the fear. Because that terror you see on screen, that's not acting. That's real panic, buried under a performance, waiting to break through.
Escape tunnels in 16 different prisons, and the Germans still have him.
Fact 4, number 4. The famous motorcycle jump, the one that made Steve McQueen immortal, almost killed him. Not because of the stunt itself, but because McQueen refused to let anyone else do it. The studio hired Bud Ekins, McQueen's friend, and one of the best stunt riders in the world, to double for the jump. They shot it, got the footage, everyone was happy. But McQueen wasn't satisfied. He wanted to be the guy on the bike in every single frame. So when the crew moved to a different location for close-ups, McQueen convinced them to let him do his own riding scenes. No double, no safety net. He tore through the German countryside at full speed, jumping ditches, dodging trees, pushing the bike harder than anyone asked him to. At one point, he flew over a hill and nearly crashed into a fence. The bike skidded, McQueen barely held on, and when he finally stopped, the crew ran over expecting injuries. But McQueen just grinned. That's the shot. Use that one. And they did, because reckless confidence on a motorcycle looks exactly like heroism on film. The line between the two, razor-thin and Steve McQueen, never cared which side he landed on. Fact 5. Number 5. There's a reason. The Great Escape feels so authentic. It was filmed at the actual location where the real prison camp once stood. Stalag Luft 3 was gone by the time production began, demolished after the war, but the land remained. John Sturges insisted on shooting there, walking the same ground the prisoners had walked, breathing the same air. The cast and crew set up in Bavaria, near the Polish border, and rebuilt the camp from old photographs and survivor testimonies. But being there changed things. Actors who'd been joking around on set went quiet when they realized where they were standing. Some of the extras were German locals who remembered the war, remembered the camp, remembered the bodies. One afternoon, during a break in filming, a crew member was digging near the old compound and found rusted barbed wire buried in the dirt. No one said anything. They just kept working. But after that, the shoot felt different, heavier, because this wasn't just a movie set. It was a graveyard. And every scene they filmed was a ghost story told in daylight, honoring men who'd never escaped at all.
This was the camp. These...
Fact 6, number 6. James Garner didn't just play a scrounger in The Great Escape, he became one. His character, Hendley, was the guy who could get anything, trade anything, charm anyone into giving up what the prisoners needed. And off camera, Garner took that role seriously. He'd grown up poor in Oklahoma during the Depression, learned early how to hustle, how to make deals, how to survive on wit and charm. So, when the production started running into supply issues, delayed shipments, missing props, Garner stepped in. He knew people in Munich, he made calls, he traded favors, he convinced local shops to loan items to the production for free. At one point, the wardrobe department needed authentic German uniforms and couldn't find them anywhere. Garner found a collector, talked him into lending pieces from his private stash, and saved the production thousands of dollars. The director loved it, the producers loved it, and Garner, he just shrugged and said, it was easier than waiting around, because to him, playing a scrounger wasn't acting. It was Tuesday. And Hollywood never forgot that James Garner didn't need a script to make things happen. Fact 7, number 7. The film's most heartbreaking moment, the execution of the 50 recaptured prisoners, is based on a real atrocity. After the actual Great Escape, the Gestapo rounded up 76 men who'd made it out of the camp. Only 3 successfully evaded capture. Of the 73 caught, 50 were executed on Hitler's direct orders, not in combat, not while resisting. They were taken to quiet roadsides, told to stretch their legs, and shot in the back. It was murder, plain and simple, and it became one of the war's most documented war crimes. When John Sturges filmed that sequence, he insisted on absolute silence on set. No jokes between takes, no casual conversation. The actors playing the condemned men stood in a line, waiting for the cameras to roll, and you could feel the weight in the air. Some of them had fought in World War II. They knew what they were recreating wasn't fiction. It was memory. When the scene wrapped, no one clapped. No one said good job. They just walked away quietly, each carrying a piece of something too heavy to name. Because some stories don't end with escape. They end with consequences that echo for generations. 245 to 250. Fact 8, number 8. The film's composer, Elmer Bernstein, almost didn't score The Great Escape because of politics. During the 1950s, Bernstein had been blacklisted in Hollywood, suspected of communist sympathies during the Red Scare. His career was destroyed overnight. He couldn't get work on major films. Studios wouldn't return his calls. He survived by scoring low-budget westerns and television shows under pseudonyms, waiting for the madness to pass. By the early 1960s, the blacklist was crumbling, but the stain remained. When John Sturges wanted Bernstein for The Great Escape, the studio hesitated. They worried about controversy, about reopening old wounds, about association. Sturges didn't care. He fought for Bernstein, argued that talent mattered more than politics, and finally the studio caved. Bernstein took the job and poured everything into it. That iconic march, the one that makes you want to stand up and salute, wasn't just music, it was defiance. It was a blacklisted composer reclaiming his voice, his career, his dignity. And when the film became a massive hit, Bernstein's score became legendary, because sometimes the greatest escape isn't over barbed wire. It's out of silence and back into the light where your work speaks louder than any accusation ever could. Fact 9. Number 9. Steve McQueen's famous baseball and glove weren't just props. They were psychological warfare. McQueen understood something fundamental about his character. Hiltz wasn't just American. He was defiantly American. In a camp full of stiff upper-lip British officers and disciplined military protocol, Hiltz was the rebel who refused to fall in line. So McQueen brought the baseball himself, a personal item he'd used since childhood, and incorporated it into nearly every scene. The rhythmic toss and catch became his signature, a meditative act that said everything about the character without words. Bored in solitary confinement, toss, catch. Planning an escape, toss, catch. Facing down German guards, toss, catch. It was brilliant, but it also drove the British actors absolutely insane. They found it disrespectful, unprofessional, and far too casual for a film about military men in crisis. McQueen didn't care. He knew the baseball made Hiltz iconic, made him different, made him unforgettable. And he was right. Decades later, people don't remember dialogue from The Great Escape. They remember Steve McQueen in solitary, alone with a baseball and a dream of freedom, tossing it against a wall like time itself didn't matter. Because sometimes rebellion isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a ball, a glove, and the refusal to stop playing.
The cooler king, who broke every rule as fast as the Germans made them.
Fact 10, number 10. The film's most famous line, "I haven't seen Berlin yet, from the ground or from the air, and I plan on doing both before the war is over," was never in the original script. It was improvised on set by Steve McQueen during a scene that was supposed to be a simple exchange between prisoners. Director John Sturges loved spontaneity, and he encouraged his actors to play with dialogue, to find moments that felt real rather than written. McQueen took that freedom and ran with it. He understood that Hiltz wasn't just cocky, he was haunted by unfulfilled ambition, by dreams bigger than prison walls. That line captured everything, the bravado, the hope, the tragic irony that he'd never make it. When McQueen delivered it, the room went quiet. Sturges didn't call cut. He just let the camera keep rolling, knowing he'd caught lightning. Later, when the editors assembled the film, that improvised moment became one of its most quoted lines, repeated in documentaries, referenced in other films, remembered long after people forgot the plot. Because great dialogue isn't always written. Sometimes it's discovered in the moment when an actor stops performing and starts living inside a character who refuses to accept that some dreams die behind barbed wire. Fact 11, number 11. Richard Attenborough, who played Squadron Leader Bartlett, had actually served in the Royal Air Force during World War II, but his role in the film was purely coincidental because Attenborough had never been a prisoner of war. He'd served in film units, documenting combat, nowhere near a German prison camp. Yet, when he read the script, something clicked. He reached out to real Great Escape survivors, men who had actually been there, who dug those tunnels and faced those guards. He met Roger Bushell's family, the real-life inspiration for his character, and learned that Bushell wasn't just brave. He was obsessed, driven by a need to hurt the enemy any way possible, even from behind wire. Attenborough absorbed those stories, carried them into every scene, and when he delivered Bartlett's final speech about the duty to escape, you can hear the weight of real sacrifice. After filming wrapped, Attenborough stayed in touch with survivors. He attended reunions, gave speeches, honored their legacy publicly for decades. Because for him, The Great Escape wasn't just another role. It was a debt he could never fully repay. a chance to give voice to men who'd risked everything while he'd been safe behind a camera. Fact 12, number 12. The film's production faced an unexpected enemy. The weather refused to cooperate. They needed summer, bright skies, and warm days to match the timeline of the real escape, which happened in March 1944. But filming took place in Bavaria during one of the coldest, wettest years on record. Rain delayed shoots constantly. Mud swallowed equipment. Actors stood shivering in summer costumes while crew members wore winter coats behind the cameras. At one point, a snowstorm hit in the middle of a supposedly warm weather scene. Production shut down for 3 days. The budget ballooned. Tempers flared. But John Sturges refused to move locations or wait for better conditions. He believed the discomfort made the performances better, more authentic, closer to what the real prisoners endured. The actors hated him for it. James Garner later joked that the only method acting required was trying not to freeze to death between takes. But when you watch the film, you can see it in their faces. That hardness, that exhaustion, that determination. It's not makeup, it's cold, wet misery transformed into cinema. Because sometimes the best performances come from the worst conditions, when comfort disappears and all that's left is survival. Fact 13, number 13. The film's iconic theme almost sounded completely different. Elmer Bernstein's original score was darker, more somber, filled with minor keys and melancholic strings. It reflected the tragedy of the story, the executions, the failure of the escape. But after a test screening, the studio panicked. Audiences left feeling depressed, defeated, emotionally drained. The film wasn't testing well, and executives blamed the music. They wanted something uplifting, something triumphant, something audiences could whistle on their way out. Bernstein was furious. He argued that changing the score would betray the truth of the story, would dishonor the men who died. But the studio insisted, and Bernstein, still rebuilding his career after the blacklist, couldn't afford to walk away. So, he rewrote it. That famous march, bright and defiant, became the compromise. And it worked. Audiences left humming victory instead of mourning loss. Bernstein hated it at first, felt he'd sold out. But over time, he made peace with the choice because the march did something unexpected. It celebrated resilience, honored the spirit of men who refused to surrender even when escape was impossible. The music didn't erase the tragedy. It transcended it. Fact 14, number 14. Donald Pleasance, who played the forger Colin Blythe, brought real wartime trauma to the role. During World War II, Pleasance served as an RAF pilot and was shot down over France. He spent a year in a German POW camp, Stalag Luft I, enduring conditions similar to those depicted in the film. When he was cast in The Great Escape, he didn't talk about his experiences. He just showed up, read the script, and quietly began reliving memories he'd spent years trying to forget. On set, other actors noticed Pleasance would sometimes freeze during scenes set in the barracks. He'd stare at the bunks, the walls, the windows, and something in his eyes would go distant. Director John Sturges recognized the look and gave him space, never pushing, never demanding more than Pleasance could give. But when the cameras rolled, Pleasance channeled that pain into Blythe, a man slowly going blind, trapped in darkness both literal and metaphorical. His final scene, standing at the train station, realizing he can't see well enough to escape, wasn't just acting. It was memory bleeding through performance. Because Donald Pleasance didn't have to imagine what captivity felt like, he'd lived it, survived it, and carried it with him every single day.
These men plotted. These men dared.
Fact 15, number 15. The motorcycle Steve McQueen rode wasn't a German bike at all. It was a British Triumph TR6 trophy, painted to look like a German military motorcycle. The production needed something fast, something McQueen could actually handle at high speeds. And German bikes from the era were too rare, too fragile, too unreliable, so they faked it. They took the Triumph, stripped it down, modified it for stunts, and disguised it with Wehrmacht markings. McQueen fell in love with that bike. He'd ride it between takes, tearing around the Bavarian countryside, racing crew members, testing limits. The stunt coordinator begged him to slow down, warned him about insurance, about liability. McQueen ignored him. One afternoon, he crashed. Not during filming, just joyriding. He slid into a ditch, scraped his shoulder, limped back to set covered in mud and grinning like a kid. John Sturges lost his mind, threatened to fire him, shut down production until McQueen promised to stop. McQueen apologized, said it wouldn't happen again. And it didn't. For 2 days. Then he was back on the bike, pushing harder than ever because Steve McQueen didn't just play rebels, he was one. 014 to 017. Fact 16, number 16. James Coburn's Australian accent was completely fake, and he got away with it. Coburn played Sedgwick, the manufacturer, an Australian prisoner who built compasses and tools from scrap materials. But Coburn was American, born in Nebraska, with zero connection to Australia. He'd never been there, never studied the accent, never even met an Australian before filming began. So he winged it. He listened to recordings, mimicked what he heard, and created something that sounded vaguely Australian to American ears. When the film was released in Australia, audiences immediately noticed. Letters poured in, critics called it out. Aussies laughed, mocked, debated which region Coburn was attempting to imitate. But here's the thing. Nobody cared. The performance was good enough that the bad accent became charming rather than distracting, a quirk rather than a failure. Coburn later admitted he had no idea what he was doing, just threw sounds together and hoped for the best. And it worked because sometimes authenticity matters less than confidence. If you commit fully to a choice, even a wrong one, audiences will follow you anywhere, even to a version of Australia that exists nowhere except in James Coburn's imagination. Fact 17, number 17. The film's greatest technical achievement happened underground where nobody could see it. The production built a functioning air pump system for the tunnels, just like the real prisoners had used. It involved bags made from waterproof materials, tubes constructed from tin cans, and a hand-operated bellows that actually pushed fresh air through hundreds of feet of tunnel. The prop master spent weeks researching the real engineering, studying photographs and diagrams from survivors. He wanted it to work, not just look convincing. And when they tested it on set, deep in those real tunnels beneath the German countryside, it worked perfectly. Air flowed, candles stayed lit, actors could breathe, but it added hours to every shoot. The system had to be constantly maintained, monitored, adjusted. If it failed, they had to evacuate immediately. The crew hated it, called it overkill, argued they could fake it with fans and clever editing. But John Sturges insisted because he understood something crucial. When actors are underground in working tunnels, breathing recycled air pushed through a handmade system. They're not pretending anymore. They're experiencing a fraction of what those prisoners endured, and that experience, that authenticity, shows in every frame. Fact 18, number 18. The fireworks scene, where prisoners celebrate the 4th of July with homemade explosives, was based on a real event that actually happened at Stalag Luft 3. American prisoners had indeed created makeshift fireworks from materials they had stolen or bartered, and they'd set them off as an act of defiance, a reminder to their captors that the American spirit couldn't be contained. When John Sturges learned about this, he insisted on including it. The production built real fireworks, small charges that would create authentic bursts of light and sound. But German authorities had strict regulations about explosives on film sets. Permits were required, safety inspections, constant supervision. The paperwork alone took weeks, and when filming day arrived, local fire marshals showed up to monitor every single explosion. They stood just off camera, extinguishers ready, watching nervously as the crew set charges and lit fuses. The actors, meanwhile, were told to react naturally, to celebrate like prisoners would. And when those fireworks went off, something magical happened. The joy on screen became real. Actors cheered, laughed, embraced, lost themselves in a moment of manufactured freedom. Because even fake explosives can ignite real emotion when they represent something bigger than themselves. Rebellion, hope, and the refusal to let walls define who you are. Fact 19, number 19. The Great Escape was released on July 4th, 1963, Independence Day in America, and it was no accident. The studio timed the release perfectly, marketing it as a patriotic celebration of freedom, courage, and the American spirit. Never mind that the real escape was primarily a British operation. Never mind that American prisoners weren't even involved in the actual breakout. The marketing campaign sold it as an American triumph, and audiences bought it completely. The film opened huge, broke box office records, played in theaters for months. But in Britain, the reception was complicated. British audiences appreciated the filmmaking, but bristled at the historical liberties, at seeing their story Americanized, at watching Steve McQueen's motorcycle jump overshadow the sacrifices of RAF officers. Critics wrote scathing reviews about Hollywood's arrogance, about cultural appropriation before that term even existed. The controversy raged for years. Survivors of the real escape gave mixed responses. Some appreciated the film's reach, its ability to honor their fallen comrades to a global audience. Others felt betrayed, erased, reduced to supporting characters in their own story. The debate never fully resolved because the Great Escape exists in that uncomfortable space between entertainment and history, where truth bends to serve narrative and accuracy loses to box office every single time. Fact 20, number 20. After the film wrapped, Steve McQueen tried to buy the Triumph motorcycle he'd ridden during the jump. He loved that bike, felt connected to it in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just a prop to him, it was a piece of his soul, metal and leather proof that he'd done something impossible. He wanted to own it, to keep that feeling alive. The studio said no. The bike belonged to them, valuable property, potential museum piece, future promotional tool. McQueen offered double its worth. The studio didn't budge. He offered triple, then quadruple, throwing money at a problem that money apparently couldn't solve. The answer stayed the same: no. So, McQueen did what McQueen did best. He stole it. Not personally, he was too smart for that. But through intermediaries, friends, stunt guys, contacts, people who owed him favors and couldn't say no. One night, the bike disappeared from studio storage, vanished without a trace, and somehow, mysteriously, it ended up in Steve McQueen's garage. The studio figured out what happened immediately. Everyone knew. The whole industry knew. But they didn't press charges, didn't make a fuss, didn't even threaten legal action. Because what were they going to do? Arrest their biggest star for stealing a prop from his own movie? The headlines alone would have been a disaster. Instead, they quietly wrote it off as lost or damaged and moved on. McQueen kept that triumph for the rest of his life. He'd ride it occasionally, show it to friends, polish it in his garage like a trophy. And when he died in 1980, that motorcycle became legend. It sold at auction decades later for over $100,000, one of the most valuable movie motorcycles in history. Because some objects transcend their origins, becoming symbols of rebellion, freedom, and one man's refusal to let anyone tell him what he couldn't have. Bonus fact. Bonus fact. The Great Escape's legacy didn't fade with time. It found new life in the most unexpected place: video games. In 2003, exactly 40 years after the film's release, a game adaptation launched on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. Most movie tie-in games are garbage, quick cash grabs rushed to market with zero soul. But this one was different. The developers didn't just watch the film and copy scenes. They obsessed over it. They brought in surviving Piuza as consultants, men who'd actually lived in camps like Stalag Luft 3. They studied the film frame by frame, researched escape techniques, analyzed tunnel engineering, and created something genuinely innovative. Players weren't just watching escape attempts. They were planning them, executing them, failing them. You could dig tunnels, forge documents, craft tools from stolen materials, distract guards, and coordinate with other prisoners in real-time stealth gameplay that actually required thinking. Critics praised it, veterans approved it, and suddenly, a new generation discovered The Great Escape. Not through history class or late-night television marathons, but through interactive experience. They felt the claustrophobia of crawling through tight underground passages, the tension of sneaking past searchlights, the crushing heartbreak of failed escapes and recapture. The game didn't replace the film. It expanded it, gave it new dimension, kept the story alive for kids who'd never heard of Steve McQueen or knew what Stalag Luft 3 was. Because great stories don't die, they evolve, adapt, migrate to new mediums, and find new audiences. And somewhere in that evolution, between barbed wire and pixels, between 1963 and forever, The Great Escape became more than a movie. It became a legacy, a reminder that freedom isn't given. It's taken, one tunnel, one jump, one brave act at a time.